Part 2, The Lost Word of Power. In concluding Part 1 of The Lost Word of Power, we brought out the fact that it requires 90% of the average locomotive's power to start its train of cars, but only half of 1% to keep it going on a level stretch of track. Using the simile of everyone as a locomotive, his work in life the train, we agreed that when we helped anyone to start a train too heavy for him alone, we released 99 minutes 12 seconds % of his powers, and were therefore entitled to a share of that surplus energy. That is the secret of power as expressed in the Vedas 2000 years before Christ. If any two people will unite their psychic forces, they can conquer the world, even though singly they can do nothing. That is the secret of power Jesus gave us. If two of you shall unite as touching anything they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father, which is in heaven. But, I can hear you say, I've given to charity all my life. I'm an easy mark for all my friends when they need money, and no panhandler ever passes me by. Yet it's never gotten me a thing. And there is Jones, too, who has always tithed to his church, and whose name is on the roll of every charitable enterprise. Yet he got caught in the market, and now hasn't a thing. Don't tell me giving to charity brings a man any increase. I am not trying to tell you any such thing. You may give everything you have to the poor, and get no good from it, just as you may put all your money into wildcat stocks, and never get a cent picking sound stocks or bonds. If you were in the business of grub staking prospectors, hoping thus to come in on half of a great gold mine, you'd be pretty careful of the men you staked, would you not? You'd try to steer clear of lazy, drunken loafers, who were looking merely for a few months' free grub, because you would know that you might spend all your money grub staking such, yet you'd never get 1 cent's return. And you would not put your money into a syndicate organized for the purpose of grub staking miners, unless you had a lot of confidence in the judgment of the men who were going to hand out the supplies. You'd rather trust your own judgment than leave this to most men, wouldn't you? Yet when you give to charitable an organization, that is exactly what you are doing, putting your money into an organization for grub staking rather than attending to it yourself. And when you give to every panhandler, you have as little chance of returns as if you grub staked a shiftless, drunken prospector. You see, it is not the giving that counts. It is the increase. Does that sound selfish? Is it selfish for a farmer to refuse to plant his seed in poor ground, and save it until he finds the right soil? Is it selfish for an engineer to refuse to turn his steam into a broken-down engine, and save it until he can find one capable of developing power? It does not matter how much money you give if it fails to produce. The man who spends $100,000 grub staking prospectors does not get any more out of it than the one who spends $100 if none of them finds gold. $10,000 sunk in a dry hole in the oil fields will not add a single star to your crown, here or hereafter, and neither will the same amount wasted on derelicts. If you want power from your giving, give where it will produce power. Give to someone who is trying, pick one who is straining every nerve to do something with what he has, choose one who will add all his own power to what you give him, and make the two carry him over the top. But above all, remember this: take heed that ye do not your alms before men, to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. To go back to the simile of the two freight trains, suppose, after you have helped another train over the grade, you are the engineer of it, use all your surplus energy to toot your whistle, to tell the world what a fine fellow you are. How much better off are you? You are like the Mississippi steamboat that had to tie up to the bank every time the captain blew the whistle. You have used up all your power. As Jesus put it, therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily, I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father, who seeth in secret himself, shall reward thee openly. That brings us to the next important point. When you give freely, gladly, and just as the farmer would be glad to find a new field of virgin soil to plant his seed, or the engineer a new outlet for his power. And look for your reward not to the return of your gift, but to the resultant power. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, said Jesus, it abideth alone. But if it dies, it bringeth forth much fruit. In the magnificent obsession, the people Dr. Hudson helped often try to pay him back. Invariably he refused to accept it, and when pressed for the reason, his answer was, because I've already used it all up myself. You can lend money, and get 6% or 10% or whatever interest you can get away with. But if you want to increase it some 30, some 60, And same 100-fold, you've got to give it as completely as the farmer gives his seed to the ground. Once planted, the seed itself is lost to him forever. It is to its fruit that he looks for his reward. Naturally, after he had eaten of that fruit, Dr. Hudson was not going to accept the return of the seed, even when it could be dug up and given back to him. But how does all this explain the method of breaking up the shell of wrong conditions, drawing upon the elements about you for the right conditions? When you want to break up anything, the surest way to do it completely is to get at the very heart of it, is it not? Nearest to the heart of almost every man are his possessions. If he will let go of them freely and willingly, he will let go of everything else. When he loses them, he is willing to put his dependence upon God, but as long as he has material possessions to depend upon, he is likely to put more or less of his dependence upon them. So when conditions become more than you can bear, when difficulties beset you and obstacles hem you in and there seems no human way out, start the breakup of the conditions that surround you by giving freely and cheerfully, but giving where it will release power. Most people will find it hard to do that. As long as it is merely intellectual effort that is required of them, they will follow. But to give after all the work it took to get together those few possessions, that's different. Yet if you will read the magnificent OB session, you will see that such giving works. Lest that be construed as making it necessary for you to buy something else before you can learn the secret, let me give you here the story of D.C. Peck, president of the Peck Spring Company of Plainville, Connecticut. A good many years ago, writes Mr. Peck, I lived in Chicago, as the representative of a large manufacturing concern in the East. My business yielded a fair income, which enabled me to support a wife and 3 children. My wife, however, was afflicted with a fibroid tumor and was constantly under the doctor's care. It was necessary that I make a business trip east, and upon my return she expected to submit to a surgical operation for its removal. One day, while awaiting a train at Waterbury, Connecticut, I met a man with whom I presently engaged in conversation. He began telling me what was apparently something of great moment to him, of the wonderful healing his wife had received after being given up to die by physicians, through what he called mind cure. I listened at first with a laugh up my sleeve, for I thought, he is only a crank and doesn't know what he is talking about. But his sincerity and earnestness finally convinced me that at least he believed in what he was talking about, and learning that he was prominent businessman of Hartford, Connecticut, I began at last to pay some attention to his story and give it real thought. Before I reached home, I had felt the dawning of a faith that was entirely new to me, which was that the Creator of humanity had not left them orphans, but was just as desirous of helping them through the life he had given, as he had been in his creation of them. Reaching my home, I told my wife what I had heard and what I felt convinced was a better solution of our trouble than a surgical operation, and was very glad to see that she was also impressed with the thought. Bear in mind this was many years ago and Christian Science and New Thought were almost or entirely unheard of. On Monday, she went to her doctor and told him she would not have the operation, but would trust to her Father in heaven for healing. He called her a fool and prophesied dire results, but we were unshaken. Without going into further details, let me say that within a week her tumor had disappeared and she became a well woman, after years of invalidism. It was to me a wonderful revelation. The idea that God cared for his children and would heal their sickness was about too great for belief, notwithstanding I had read of his willingness and ability to do it many times. I had read of the Christ coming to earth for that very purpose, but I didn't believe it meant me. I found that this demonstration had given me something which had been entirely lacking, which was faith in the unseen Father. And here comes an apparent contradiction to all the promises. My business, which had been profitable, began to wane. One misfortune after another followed, and at last, in sheer desperation, I resigned from my company because I could not make a living and support my family. Then followed days of agony and depression, when after showing us most wonderfully the answer to our prayer for healing, God had apparently deserted us. He was leaving us to starve. I had been so engrossed with the wonderful thought of his healing power that I had gone to the sick wherever I could find them and told them of the better way. But apparently God had deserted us. Why should we be unable to make a living? Why be left to starve in a great city thousands of miles from friends and relatives who might help us? I struggled against my fate as valiantly as I could. Day after day I went forth seeking employment. I answered advertisements but without avail. At length I came to a place where I was at my wits' end. I could do no more. At this point I might have called for human assistance. But after the wonderful demonstration of divine power I had witnessed, I felt that it would be denying that power to do so. And so I promised not to apply to any less a source for help than the great giver. Instead, I closeted myself, telling my wife I would not come forth until I had received an answer to my terrible problem. I spent hours searching my Bible for comfort, but comfort seemed to have been withheld. At length, very weary and worn, I came to this passage in Ezekiel, Son of man, behold with thine eyes and ears the things which I will show unto thee, for to this intent wert thou brought hither. This may have been written primarily for Ezekiel, but there came such a wave of emotion to me that the words stood out like fire. It was a message to me alone at that particular time. I emerged from my closet a changed man. I had given up the struggle. Henceforth I was looking for something to be shown me. I ceased looking for employment, and wonderful to relate to worry. Something big was to come soon. The little money I had been enabled to save was soon used, and one morning at breakfast we ate our last meal. Not a penny to buy our dinner and a wife and 3 children dependent upon us. Yet this is what I said to my wife, and strange to relate, without a particle of depression or doubt. I am glad we are brought to this, for now we can prove the truth of God's saying, that He knoweth our needs. Nothing to do but wait. No business, no food, no money. Simply sitting there in silence, just waiting. About 11:30, the mailman brought a letter. It was in an unknown superscription. We broke it open and took out a check for $10. A short note accompanied it. The Lord directs me to send you this check, so please thank Him and not me. Tearfully I handed the check and note to my wife, saying here is an earnest of what our Father is going to do for us. But $10 didn't last forever, although it provided us with a good dinner. Other days were to follow. We tried to find our place in the scheme of things. We were not to be idle, and so we continued to preach the gospel of healing and abundance through faith in the unseen. We went to the hospitals and to homes of the poor, endeavoring to make ourselves of some use. It will not be necessary, I am sure, to write a biography of our life for you, but just to say that for 7 years thereafter we lived in the city of Chicago and were fed. Our family survived, and true to our resolution, we never asked help from a human being. I gave all that I had to give, for my experience had already taught me that in order to receive, I must give. And all the promises of support were given me. A miracle, as far as human conception of what it consisted of, happened every day. Money came to me from many unknown sources. When rent was due and we asked for it, it came. I needed a new overcoat and asked for it. It soon came, and insofar as I know, no human being had ever heard me express my need for one. During this period, we certainly had our days of trial. Why not? Every human being must stand the testing. We took many poor, weak ones into our home and fed them, and they went forth rejoicing in health. The money to feed them was always provided. But we couldn't show the appearance of abundance. Enough each day was ours, and we were content. We didn't covet riches and had little thought of them. At one time we were engaged in selling real estate, which as most dealers know, is at times a precarious occupation. We were greatly in need of funds, so we decided to apply to the one source of all good. The following promise was the basis of our application. Whatsoever things ye desire when ye pray, believe that ye have received them and ye shall have them. We do not claim that at the time we understood why we were to claim we had received, for to all appearances we had not, but we decided to be childlike in our faith and abide by the directions. Therefore, we made note in our diary about as follows: we have this day made our demand upon the higher power for the exact sum of $400. We need this money for the following purposes: to pay up a few small bills, to purchase a stove, to publish a farm catalog. We uttered this demand just once. We felt that to reiterate would imply unbelief. But we did not forget to praise God that we already had the S-400. We did this simply because we were told in the promise to believe and chose to obey. Each night upon retiring we religiously uttered praise for something still invisible to outward sight. But we did more. Closing our eyes we tried to visualize the $400. We called to mind a small table entirely empty except for a package of bills labeled $400. They were in denominations of $100. We could see in our mind's eye the green faces and yellow backs. This visualizing process became a source of great delight, and the reality increased continually. One evening about 3 months after making our demand, the phone rang while we were eating supper. Upon answering it, we heard the following from a man whose farm we had listed some time previously. "Mr. Peck, I have sold a farm to the party whom you sent to me, and as soon as the deeds are passed, I will send you a check for the commission. In about a week his letter came enclosing his check for exactly $400. Really, it was not so much a surprise that it was joy, that I had once more demonstrated that God's promises are real. I entered in my diary, "This day the promise I took has been literally fulfilled, praise the Lord." Scoffers might say, "There's nothing supernatural or wonderful about this. You are in the real estate business and liable at any unexpected time to make a sale." But the convincing evidence to my mind was the fact that I had never spent a moment of my time in showing the farm or in making the sale. I had some months before merely mentioned that I had such a farm, to a prospective buyer who was at that time somewhat uncertain that he wanted such a property. The circumstances served to open my eyes to the fact that I had a rich father who had said, "Son, thou art ever with me and all that I have is thine." I was encouraged to ask for larger gifts. I was not a property owner, and my business, while affording a living, did not enable me to purchase a home of my own. So I asked next for $2,000, imagining it as I had done with the $400. When the $2,000 came, I asked for other things in the same way. The results of the faith engendered by these incidents are that at the present time I am rather a large property owner for the small town in which I live, and am president of a successful business built up from a very small amount of capital. Our Father has showered us with blessings exactly as He had promised. We have given up entirely thoughts of what we can get. The important matter is how and what we can give. Giving releases power, just as breaking up any form of condensed energy releases power. But merely releasing energy is not enough. To get good from it, you must direct that power into some engine where it will turn certain wheels and bring back greatly increased power to you. That is the whole secret of power. To find the lost word of power, we must first define what a word is. It is a mental image, is it not? In the beginning was the Word, says St. John. In the beginning was the mental image. To give our word power, we must fill out our mental image with whatever elements it needs to give it life. To see how this is done, let us go back again to our single cell. It was surrounded by water, you know, and it drew every element it needed for life from the water around it by absorption. And what it did then, it does now. Every living cell draws the elements it needs for life from the water, or in the case of the higher animals, from the lymph around it. But where groups of thousands of millions of cells work together in a single organization, as in the body of any animal, it takes a complicated organism to provide the water and the different elements that must go into it, so mouths and stomachs and hearts and lungs and all the different tubes and passageways had to be evolved. More than that, when it became necessary to pick certain elements for food, means had to be found for finding them, so, the organism put out feelers, which presently developed into eyes and ears and hands and feet. But intelligence was required to search for and distinguish the proper elements for food, so nerve centers were formed, with wires which came to the surface all over the body and acted like so many antennae, reporting to the central nervous system, or the brain. Those millions of antennae are good for more than the mere receiving of impressions from the outside. They are hands that can reach out for what they want. They are the sending wires for all the tiny microphones located in your nerve centers that can broadcast a need, and then gather in each necessary element as it appears. What was it enabled a crawfish to grow a shell, the bee a sting, the bird its wings? Neither more nor less than the nerve centers of these creatures, broadcasting the need for certain new elements lest they perish from the earth, then reaching out for them with their thousands of hands. Fear of annihilation had already broken up their dependence upon their old organisms. They knew they could not with their limited means survive the dangers besetting them, so they set their nerve centers vibrating with the appeal to all the powers of the universe for the elements they conceived necessary for life. Those same means are just as available to you in any crisis today as to those early forms of life. Instead of only 2 hands, you have millions. Instead of being dependent upon 1 or 2 hooks for the fish you need from the lymph about you, you have a net capable of catching 1,000,000 times as many. And the means of using your net have not varied. 1. Break up the shell of circumstance surrounding you. Disclaim it and cast off all dependence upon it. It is this breaking up that is aimed at in the affirmations of the most successful metaphysical religions and the most practical psychologists of today. When a metaphysician repeats there is no life, truth, intelligence or substance in matter, what else does he mean than that he is taking his faith out of the form into which his circumstances or body or surroundings have congealed, breaking them up, and asking for a new deal? For those who feel inclined to scoff, let me say right now it works. And any experienced physician will tell you he has seen it work. How does it work? In the same way it works for the superintendent of a foundry to tell the foreman that a certain casting is no good, he is not going to accept it, and it must be done over. What does the foreman do? Throw that casting into the next heat, fixes his mold more carefully, and pours it again. Your mind is the superintendent, your nerve centers are your foundry foreman with millions of workers at their command in the tiny antennae that come to the surface all over your body. Whatever mold your mind gives to them, in that mold the nerve centers cast your circumstances, your surroundings, your body. But if you don't like the casting, you can refuse it, and make your founders melt it down and try again. And it was for this purpose that affirmations were first devised. Because of the efficacy of such affirmations when earnestly and understanding used, I give you below a breaking up affirmation for you to use when limitation and lack, or difficulties and trials beset you. There is no permanence, no reality to any circumstance or condition unlike God good. For all is mind and its creations. God never created anything unlike himself good. Therefore there can be no reality in, here specify the tubulous circumstance or condition, for it is no part of God's creation. It is the negative affirmation, the breaking up of the wrong conditions. That is the first essential. But if you stop there, the wrong conditions, or others as bad, would soon return. You must replace them with the right model. That comes next. 2. Set your every nerve center at work, drawing to you from the whole universe all the elements necessary to the fulfillment of your desire. But be sure to give them a model in which those new elements can take shape. Form your mold so clearly, so strongly, that you can actually see it in your mind's eye. This is just as important as the breaking up of the old conditions. Unless you provide proper molds for the new material, you will be like the man Jesus told of, out of whom the devil was driven. When the devil came back, he found the house swept clean and garnished, but no other occupant there. So he got him 7 other devils more wicked than himself, and took possession. And the last state of that man was worse than the first. No use breaking up the old imperfect and unsatisfactory shells, if you are going to let the new materials take the same shapes. You must see in your mind's eye that new material flowing to you, you must visualize it in its perfect shape. Only thus can you believe that you receive. And only thus can you have it. You see, you are a cell in the great God body just as any cell in your body is part of you. You are surrounded by lymph as surely as is every cell in your physical body. That lymph contains all the elements you can possibly need for complete expression, and complete expression means happiness and health and success to the fullest degree. There are no limitations. God does not fatten certain of us and starve others, any more than you favor certain cells of your body to the detriment of others. If any cell does not get all the nourishment it needs, it is because it is not working or not working aright. It matters not how great the demand for any element. There is plenty for all. And as fast as the supply is used, more of that element is poured in by the bloodstream. There is never any lack, any limitation. Each cell has only to freely use all it has, in order to absorb as much more of any element as it wants. The cell's only danger is not from lack of nourishment around it, but from inability to take it in because of clogged pores and passages. As before stated, the only reason for sickness and old age is failure on the part of the cells to throw out the used elements, and consequent clogging of the passages they cannot take in the elements necessary to new life. It is the shell again allowing circumstances or conditions to congeal to such a point that you are helpless against them. You have to break them up and keep breaking them. In certain exercises, stretching and the like, you find the way to break up such conditions in the physical body. And in the methods for giving outlined earlier in this lesson, are the ways to break them up in the God body. When you have followed those rules, you can set the nerve centers in you seeking and demanding power. Like Randolph in The Magnificent Obsession, you have fulfilled the conditions. You have only to put yourself in the right frame of mind to receive it. To do that, enter into your closet, in other words, go where you can be quiet and undisturbed, and when you have shut the door, repeat the affirmation given above under number 1, but add to it, I am a perfect cell in the great God body, surrounded by lymph containing every element I need for complete and perfect expression. I am drawing upon that lymph now for every element of life. Every ounce of power, every bit of understanding I need to, here put in whatever thing it is you want to accomplish. Then see it taking form as you bless it, I bless it, and baptize it God's own perfect, whatever it is, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Bless that new form as it takes shape in your mental mold, and hold that mold to it, hold the faith, hold the image before your mind's eye, until it hardens so all can see it. And if you want to know the lost word of power, the secret name of God, it is I am. Before Abraham, said Jesus, was I am. And throughout the Old Testament, you find frequent references to God as the eternal I am. That is the secret of success in all prayer, in everything you do, that there is only one present, only one bit of time you need to worry about the everlasting now. Whatsoever things ye ask for when ye pray, believe that ye receive them. Not, mind you, that you are going to get them in some dim and distant future, but that you have them now. You are part of the great I am. You have everything of good now. You are perfect. You have health and strength and power and riches and happiness. It remains only for you to make this manifest. How are you to do this? 1. By sowing your seeds of the harvest you wish to reap. 2. By cultivating it through serenity and faith. 3. By visualization, seeing in your mind's eye the abundant harvest you are praying for. 4. By thanking God for it. Difficulties may beset you, obstacles get in your way, and ill healths hold you down. Bless them. Know that there is only one God and He is good, therefore anything evil that may trouble you is good in disguise. You have heard the old aphorism that when fortune means to man most good, she looks upon him with a threatening eye. If you can bless every seeming evil, know that it is really good working for you in another guise, and that it is working with all else of life for your own good. It will quickly show you the silver lining underneath. It is only as you resist evil that it turns to harm. Resist not evil. St. Paul bade us, but overcome evil with good. Serene faith, perfect trust that God is working for your good even through what may seem great evil, will turn the greatest misfortune to your gain. Mind you, that doesn't mean pious resignation or any cant of that sort. It means active faith. The kind of faith John Burroughs had in mind when he wrote, "Serene I fold my hands and wait, nor care for wind or tide or sea, I rave no more against time or fate. For, lo, my own shall come to me. The stars come nightly to the sky, the tidal wave unto the sea, nor time, nor space, nor deep, nor high, shall keep my own away from me." The Pendulum of Giving and Getting by E. Leslie Hoot. How a simple plan brings abundance to one thankful family. There is a pendulum of giving and getting that swings constantly back and forth within our lives, with the same regularity as the pendulum of a clock. I have come to recognize each need as a red light signal, a time to stop and think what and where I can give. Then I turn on the yellow light of preparedness by tuning into my source, God, for direction. Instantly the green light flashes me. I go and supply my need, whether it be a prayer, a condolence, a material gift, or what not. One day as I started my evening meal, I had no bread in the house, and I recollected that I had no money in my purse with which to buy it. This was my red light, my need warning me that I was becoming remiss in my giving. So I sat down to contemplate what and to whom I could give. Was I withholding something from someone that He wanted and needed? Was God trying to use me as a channel for His good? A family had recently moved next door. There were 2 girls, and I had noticed they were rather shabbily dressed. I remembered my blue silk dress hanging in the closet. I had not worn it for some time and did not really need it. Instantly I had the impulse to give it to one of the girls next door. I walked the floor several times holding the dress tucked under my arm. Would they think me presumptuous? Would they be insulted, I wondered? I had never even spoken to them. However, the thought persisted, so I took it over. Diffidently I knocked on the door and introduced myself. My new neighbors were very cordial, and soon I was explaining why I had come. Then I handed the dress to the larger girl. Her eyes shone like stars as she held it up for her mother's inspection. "Mother, isn't it lovely? You won't have to make me one now. It's just my size. You see, Mother has been ill. She was lying down when you came and had just said that she couldn't get me a dress for graduation, and I was feeling sorry for myself. Now you can imagine how happy this has made me." "God does answer prayers, surely," the mother answered, half to herself, and I saw her hastily wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. When I reached home I remembered why I had taken her the dress. I needed bread? But it really didn't seem so important anymore. I looked to see if I had enough ingredients in the house to make some. I didn't. I began to search drawers and pockets for stray pennies, and at last I found just enough to buy 1 loaf of bread. I called my little girl to go to the store. She was just starting out the door when the doorbell rang. There stood one of my neighbors, holding in his hand a pan covered with a towel. He smiled and said, "My wife was baking, and thought perhaps you might like some warm rolls for your supper." For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I thanked him in a startled, awestruck manner. I carried the pan to the kitchen and unwrapped it. As I gazed upon the lovely golden brownness of those dozen homemade rolls, I could only humbly, chokingly exclaim, "Father, forgive me. I should have known you would give me bread even at the last minute." There was the time I needed a new tablecloth for my breakfast table. I knew the size, color, and price I wished to pay. But though I had been looking for several weeks, I could not seem to find a suitable one. The last time I looked, I came home rather chagrined. Nevertheless, I still persisted in believing that the right cloth was there for me at the right price. I now resolved not to look for a while but to wait and not be anxious. The telephone rang. It was a friend on the other side of the city asking me to pray for a friend who was ill. "Will you meet me downtown tomorrow?" she asked. "I have something I have wanted to give you." I met her and she immediately handed me a package. "May I look?" I asked. "Of course, if you wish," she replied. I drew from the package the tablecloth that I had been seeking, or at least its exact counterpart. "Where in the world did you get this?" I exclaimed in amazement. "I bought it a week ago at a little store close to my home." No wonder I could not find one. The Father knows our need and supplies it as we supply that of our fellow man. My sister stated she wished a certain position in the city where I live. She lived in a nearby town but was willing to sell her furniture and come to the city if she could secure the kind of work she wished. I knew her desire was right and sincere, since it was really an urge to express her talent in a larger field. I meditated over it with her. One day I noticed an ad in the paper for just the kind of position she wanted. There was no time to send her the paper or communicate with her and have her answer, so I answered the ad for her. I knew it was really the Father writing the letter through me. She received the position. In the meantime, my husband had had an accident at work. He was off without pay for almost 2 weeks. This placed us in debt. We even thought of moving to cheaper quarters. Finally, we knew that if we could secure a loan of a certain amount of money, it would relieve the strain and we could remain where we were. The next evening, my sister came for dinner. We carelessly mentioned our circumstances but did not mention that we needed any money. She was so happy about her new position that I had to leave the room for a minute to realize that we had a right to the same abundance. Almost immediately she followed me. "I feel you need a loan," she said. "You helped me when I needed it, according to your ability, and now you must let me help you." And again the Father, through her, placed in my hand the money I needed, and just the right amount. There was the time when we were invited to a cottage for the weekend. As my little girl collected the bathing suit, she held hers up in dismay. It was entirely too small. I told her the way to supply a need in her life was to look around and see what she could give to someone else. I told her the story of my lights. She started immediately to help her brother wash and polish the car, a task that she ordinarily disliked. When she had almost finished, the girl next door came to the fence. She held up for inspection a lovely wool bathing suit, the color of which yellow was particularly suited to my little girl. "Can you use this?" she said. "When Mother washed it, the water was too hot, and now I can't get into it. It is practically new." My little girl held it up. It was just her size. She looked at me with speechless wonder in her eyes. It worked. "Mother," she cried, and the rest of the family wondered what we were talking about. Sometimes a person gets back just the material thing he gives another but from a different source. For instance, a friend visiting at my house ruined her hose through a mishap. She declared it was her only pair, and I gave her the last good pair I had in the house. The next day, a woman that I knew only slightly called for spiritual assistance. The following day she brought me a lovely pair of hose, much better than the one I had given away, saying it was in appreciation of the piece I had helped her find. Then there was the time I needed potatoes. I was on my way to the country to visit a little boy who was ill. I told the children to remind me to buy potatoes on our way back, as we had none in the house. After my visit, when I went to get in the car, there was a bushel of lovely, fresh dug potatoes. "Oh," I exclaimed in amazement. The boy's father humbly answered, "I don't have much cash just now, but I did want to give you something." When I told him they were just what I needed, we were both made glad. I remember the time I wanted some fresh candy, my favorite kind, which was displayed in a downtown store. I could not decide to buy it, so followed my motto: when you are in doubt, don't. There is no doubting God. I decided to divert my appetite into another channel by buying truth literature for a friend. That evening my nephew, who worked in that downtown store, came home and handed me a box. I had an urge to buy this for you today, he said. I opened it, and there was the candy I had so much wanted, not a pound, the amount I should have bought, but a pound and a half. Surely God does supply all our needs abundantly when we consciously become a supply channel through which He is enabled to fill the needs of another. These are only a few of the many instances in which I have proved Paul's statement. Do you need something just now? Then tune into the Father, that gives of all good gifts, and find out what and where you can give. Give according to your capacity and ability, and you will surely start the pendulum of giving and receiving swinging regularly in your life. Would you know life abundant, love doubled for all you give? There is a means no surer than helping someone to live. Ellen H. Jones pasted this on your mirror. I can have what I want, if I plant it. The Magnificent Obsession, from which quotations have been freely made in The Lost Word of Power, is published by Willett, Clark, and Colby, 440 South Dearborn Street, Chicago, 3, at a price of $2.50. This book was for many months a bestseller. It has been dramatized and put in the movies. It is a story that anyone can read with both entertainment and profit. The Green Light, by the same author, is quoted in The Seven Lay Sons of the God in You. It can be obtained from Houghton, Mifflin Company, Boston, Mass. Spread the good word. One of the principles advocated in The Magnificent Obsession is to extend your personality through helping others. In doing this, you sow a crop whose harvest comes back to you increased manifold. It is an outward flow of power that completes its cycle and returns laden with energy. For our every unselfish act, there is a response, a return of the pendulum that we have started swinging. It is Emerson's law of compensation.